Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, I wanted to have a little discussion here on a rather infamous aspect of tabletop wargaming, and that's the pile of shame. Now don't worry if you don't know what that is. That just means you're new to the hobby, and I guarantee you'll find out really quick. But just for the sake of covering our bases, the pile of shame refers to that backlog of models, kits, starter boxes, everything that you have great intentions to build, but might not always get around to. Now the emergence of this pile of shame is, I think, pretty simple to explain. There's two reasons for it. Reason number one, we acquire new models, new stuff, at a really rapid pace. Why, in less than 15 minutes, I can go to my local gaming store, buy a starter set, go home, and start building it. Then the next week, there'll be a new release, a really good sale, a miniature market or something like that, something that's just too good to pass up, so I'll buy that too. Now, that's not a huge deal. You'll finish your first project in a couple weeks, and then you'll start in on this next one. But before those next weeks are over, you've probably done it again because you found another deal that was too good to pass up, or something that you just had to have at that moment, or something you've been waiting for and finally managed to find. The point is, a 30-second purchase can equal days or weeks of hobbying, and every couple days or weeks you're making more of those 30-second purchases. Now, game companies, they're certainly not going to slow down their release schedule. In fact, they kind of count on this idea that as gamers, we're very impulsive. We like to buy this stuff because it's fun. And at the same time, we know that we'll always come up with new models, new games, new project ideas. We'll just keep discovering more awesome parts of this hobby that we want to spread out and enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how players end up with mountains of boxes, many of which will sit unopened for a very long time. Now, reason number two, that's more our fault. This hobby has a ton of aspects to it. You got building, and that includes kit bashing and custom sculpting and things like that. You got painting, and you got basing. And if you don't really like any one of those stages, you'll probably put it off to work on another project or model that's in a stage you really enjoy. And that's how a lot of players will end up with piles and piles of assembled but unpainted minis. I mean, let's face it, painting is the great bottleneck of this hobby, whether you like painting or not. New paint systems, stuff like contrast, stuff like speed paint, they've certainly helped. And techniques like learning how to slap chop or dry brush, that can help speed things up too. But no matter how good you are, you will never be able to paint a model as fast as you can buy it. And if you don't like painting models, you're going to put that off even longer than the person who slowly works through it. Okay, so that's how the pile appears. We know what it is, we know how it grows. Does it get a bad rap, though? To what degree should we be embarrassed or ashamed of the fact that we bought an army box months and months ago and it's still in the shrink wrap? Well, I think there's kind of a spectrum or multiple ways to look at this. So let's start with the reason why, well, yeah, maybe you should be a little bit ashamed. Each of those boxes, each of those purchases represents time and money. Money that you've already spent, and time that you've committed now to spend at some point later in the future. Now, if you got the model or the kit as some kind of freebie, then by all means let it sit there until doomsday, because you're not losing anything. But if your pile of shame is huge, and I mean huge, as in it would take another global lockdown to give you the time needed to work through it, then that pile represents a lot of money that's just sitting there, and a lot of time that you're somehow supposed to come up with to work through it. And if you didn't have the time when you bought it, where are you going to find the time to work through it? Knowing that while you're trying to work through it, you're probably going to keep buying more and adding to it. Now, some of you might say, well, I've got a really good job, I've got lots of disposable income, I could write off everything in my pile of shame and it really wouldn't damage my finances. First, I'm super jealous of you. And if you can afford that, then maybe there's something else you could put your money towards, like a membership on the channel here. But the point is, the pile of shame, it's shameful because to you it represents a loss until you do something with it. It's time and money that's just sitting there not doing anything, and you stare at it knowing that you're probably not going to get to it, and also knowing that you're going to keep adding to it. So that's what makes it shameful. Miniature wargaming isn't like collecting Funko Pops or action figures, where you simply acquire, display, and you're done. Miniatures are meant to be built. They're meant to be painted, and then you either put them on display or you use them in a game. But we as hobbyists, we get really attached to stuff that we buy, even if we've never opened it. So it's not easy to sell things off, to part with them, to give them away, even when we can admit to ourselves that we got way too much. So the pile just keeps growing. We know we're not going to get through it. We can't bring ourselves to sell it. The money is spent. The time is committed. We know we're probably not going to get through it all. And we know we're probably going to keep adding as well. Now, hold on a sec. I didn't make this video to browbeat us and make us feel terrible. I'm just trying to point out the reality of why the thing is there and why it gets the rep that it does. So yeah, there are circumstances where the pile of shame, I think, is legitimate. If you need climbing gear to reach the top of the pile, then you might have a larger problem to deal with. But I would argue that there is a degree to which the pile of shame isn't really that shameful. So allow me to make my case. As mentioned already, wargaming is a hobby with multiple elements. There's building, painting, collecting, playing. Now personally, I enjoy all of those, but not to the same degree. Some days I really want to build stuff. Some days I really want to paint stuff. But what happens when I want to paint but I don't have anything primed and the weather isn't very good? I can't prime anything there. Maybe I was working on a project of my own, but I got a commission, and so I have to put that on the backlog. There are times when my own pile of shame grows up, but it's not because I'm just purchasing stuff and adding it too. There are legitimate reasons why we can't always get to the models that we buy. That's not a pile of shame, I don't think. That's an assembly line. That's me having projects at various stages, and I think that's a good thing. And I think it might help many of you to realize you shouldn't necessarily be ashamed of having multiple projects at multiple stages of completion. See, I have a friend who has iron self-discipline, and he will not purchase a new box until whatever he's working on has been painted and based, and my hat is off to him. I know that if I tried to do that and forced myself to paint something, and to say to myself, you can't do anything else until you finish painting these units, I know I will start doing a crappy job. I will lose interest. The painting won't feel like a hobby. Instead, it'll feel like a chore or like a job. And that's not what I want. That's not what anybody wants. But if I have a handful of projects at various stages, it means that whatever I'm in the mood for, I can enjoy and still be working through my backlog. As long as I'm seeing steady progression through all the stages, I don't necessarily see the problem. Now, having said that, if you tell yourself that's what you're doing, but none of your projects go beyond a certain stage, like you buy them all and you have mountains of gray plastic, but you never have any intention of really painting them, and you're probably not going to pay someone else to do it, well, come on, you're kind of kidding yourself. The multiple working projects approach, I think, only works if you carry every project through to completion or get it to the stage that you don't want to do it anymore and pay someone else to do it. But if you're going from start to finish and constantly moving on a different project, I don't think you need to feel as ashamed of that pile of shame. Although, I mean, there still is a point when you can ski down it that you probably should do something. So, before I end this video, I did want to bring up something new here. It's a new phenomenon that just suddenly occurred to me. I'm probably behind the curve on this, but I thought I'd bring it up anyways, because I'm pretty sure this is happening and folks might not even be noticing. 3D printing is and will continue to be this new technology that is rocking the miniature wargaming world to its core. Not only are 3D printing designs getting better every day, but 3D printing itself is kind of taking after the computer industry. That is, it's getting better, it's getting faster, and it's getting cheaper at an almost exponential rate. So how's that a problem? Well, plastic and pewter have given us the pile of shame. I wonder if 3D printing is giving us the file of shame. By the way, that's copyrighted. It's mine. I thought of it. And if I can add that word to the hobby lexicon, I will die a happy man. Just saying. Okay, seriously though, the file of shame. It's real. And in two subtle ways, I wonder if it's even worse than the pile of shame. Try this as an experiment. Even if you don't have a 3D printer, just try this. Go to My Mini Factory and just start looking for stuff. Anything. Type in something you're currently working on or something you've always been interested in purchasing and just see what comes up. And I'll bet you will find some pretty amazing stuff. And then you'll look at the price and you'll look at it and you'll think, holy cow, that's only $15? And then you'll realize you don't have a 3D printer. But you might start thinking, well, wait a minute, if I have a 3D printer, I could have that model for $15 plus the cost of a little bit of resin. Or you might think, a friend of mine has a 3D printer, so for $15 and maybe throw a little to them to print it for me, I can have that model and still come way ahead of buying one from a hard plastic seller, especially if you're buying from Games Workshop. Now imagine what that's like for people who have 3D printers. Maybe I'm the only one here, but I know my impulse of buying 40K models was always kept in check by just how expensive it was. I'd see something cool that on the shelf and I'd grab it and think, oh, maybe I'll start this, and then I'd turn it over and look at the price and go, maybe not, and I'll put it back on the shelf. But when I'm browsing through My Mini Factory and I see something that looks awesome and the price for the file is $5, $10, sold. And soon I start to accumulate a hefty stack of STL files that I've paid for, but I've never printed. And voila, the file of shame is born. So here's where I think the file of shame can be a little bit more devious than the pile of shame. Unlike box sets and model kits, STL files are digital. They don't take any physical space. So you don't have the constant reminder every time you walk in the room, open the closet, look under the table. That means there's potential for you to increase the file of shame far beyond anything you could imagine, and you'll never even notice it because it's a tiny folder somewhere on your desktop that you might not even open very often. In my case, just to tell you, I'm preaching, what I've experienced here. I have purchased complete army files for 3 entire fantasy dwarf armies because I kept looking for the one that I really liked the best. And here's the sad thing. After buying all 3 of those, that was before I discovered Highlands Miniatures and ended up paying for those ones, which I finally got printed and painted. So I have 3 entire armies of dwarf STLs that I'm probably never going to paint. Now, collectively, they cost me maybe $100, maybe $150 total, which that's less than the cost of a Start Collecting box, or what do they call it, the Combat Patrol box. So I'm still coming out ahead a bit, but if I never print them, that's $150 that I kind of flushed down the toilet. So what I think here is the potential for this file of shame to maybe even overtake the pile as 3D printing gets better. And then consider, for example, on top of doing that, I've got my subscription to One Page Rules, to their Patreon. So every month I essentially get 2 entire armies worth of STL files. And ask me how many of those I've actually printed. Now in that case it's a lot less. That's $10 a month. So it takes me an entire year to spend the amount of money that I did on those dwarf armies. But the point is, I'm spending money on stuff I'm not printing. And part of the reason I stick around is because of those loyalty rewards. Getting that dwarf train, I gotta tell you, that was pretty awesome. So, I've heard of people measuring the pile of shame in number of boxes, height of the stack. I've even heard one person mention they measure it in weight. I wonder if soon we can talk about how many gigs or terabytes of how many terabytes of files people have. It's something to think about. And the thing is, if you feel guilty enough about those files, you start printing them, now you've added them to the pile of shame. So, that's all I got for this. I was just curious, throw that out there. The pile of shame and the file of shame. We know how we get them. What to do about them, that's something for another video. If you have a tip that might help out, how do you work through your backlog? How do you try and control to make sure neither of those gets too big? If you got something, put it in the comments. Who knows? You might help someone, you might help me, find a way to break that logjam and get things moving. But for now, keep chugging through. It always feels good to finish a project you've been working on for a long time. And even if you have another dozen projects behind it, every model you finish is one more off the pile. And for now, that's good enough.